Welcome to our global research panel. I don't know if there's anybody in the room who needs to be convinced that a global perspective is becoming more and more important, whether you're a provider or user of the research. But just in case, I have three little thoughts on that. Number one, only 4% of the world population lives in the US. So 96% are in markets outside of the US. Number two, not only are most markets outside of the US, those are the markets that are growing fastest, be it China, India, Brazil, and yes, Africa. And number three, many of you are familiar with our NeuroStandards project, where we look at neuromarketing. And that project, even though we probably didn't really think about that in this way, it was a global project. We had vendors from 3 different continents, and we had a lot of multinational companies being sponsors of this project. So another example of how innovation today really is a global business, and that we should look beyond our borders. Now beyond that, I'm sure we're going to get a lot more reasons to embrace a global perspective from our panel, which I'm very excited to be able to introduce now. They're going to come on the stage in the order of how far they traveled in order to get here. So first, I welcome Dr. Bernhard Engel from Germany. And second, a very close second, from London, James Holden from the BBC. And then we have more local, but still with an enormous global perspective, Luiz Duarte from DIRECTV, and Mainak Mazumdar from Nielsen here, who has also global responsibilities. And what we would like to do is go around the table here and have everybody sort of introduce themselves quickly about the company, the research issues, and most importantly, what are the kind of responsibilities on your job, the kind of issues that are most urgent, most pressing, and most interesting, hopefully to you too. Then we're going to have a little discussion about the various issues that are going to be raised. And finally, we'll try to have some time left for you to ask questions of the panel too. So with that introduction, maybe we'll start right here in Europe with Dr. Engel. Tell us a little bit about your responsibilities.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Horst. And I have just seen also your chart about growing countries. I think I should say that also Germany is a growing country. We had in the last year 3% growth of the gross national income. And so we have also a growing TV market in Germany. And most of you will not be familiar with the German TV market. We have about 6 billion US dollar TV advertising net, and we have another 6.5 billion euro from public fees. You should know public broadcast in Germany has about 45% of the complete share. And in Germany, I think we have really a relatively new television audience measurement system. We have just changed the complete technology for a new system, and with our new system we can measure a lot. We are measuring cable, satellite, terrestrial, analog, digital. We are measuring VCRs, DVDs, hard disks. We can distinguish between standard definition and high definition, everything down to the second, and accessible for the user. And also, we have a system where we can integrate guest viewing as out-of-home viewing. So I think we have really a lot covered. My personal role in the German JIC is that I'm a member of the Technical Commission since 1992. And I work in several leading positions, for example, for the development of the analysis tools or for metering systems. And I just finished at the end of 2010 my second election period as head of the Technical Commission. But yeah, I think if I told you what we are covering, everybody knows what we are not covering. And these are the challenges for the future. And I think they are worldwide always the same. Of course, IPTV and streaming media is top of mind, and we are really struggling with this problem. But I think it is not only a problem of measurement system. It is also a problem how you can integrate it into a currency, and I think we have already heard something about these topics today. I think we have a little bit more the focus in Germany that we have the distinction we have in television, something like a program log, and we are missing a program log for IPTV and streaming media. You can combine things very different. You have something, let's take the case of Germany's Next Top Model. There you have best of, and you have playlists, and you have extended versions, and. This is one major difference, and if you want to make something like a total reach or something like that, it is difficult just what you should sum up in order to have a total reach. The other thing is that you have different models for advertising. You have different rating cards, even if you have the same television content. You are selling in two different ways, and this makes it really difficult. Or you can ask the question whether it is useful just to make a total reach if you do not use a total reach for the evaluation of the return on investment because you have different rating cards. This is really a problem, and we do not have at this time a solution. But this is really a hard challenge, and we hope that we will come to a solution. I think what we want to do is that we would use our television panel, just as you also told in your presentation in the other room, and we will measure internet usage also in the television audience measurement panel. And then we will have a fusion with data where we also have to struggle with the problem that distributions of streaming media usage has to be the same in order that we can make a good duplication, and that we do not make with a, let's say, with a simple fusion process that we destroy some distributions for duplication. I think these are the main challenges that we have, and I hope that we will, in 2 or 3 years, we will have a solution.
Thank you very much. Altogether, I think a lot of problems that were quite similar to what we are facing here and what's been discussed here. What do things look like for the BBC?
Things I'd like for the BBC. First of all, good afternoon. Thank you very much indeed to the ARF for the invitation to give you a UK perspective and for me to get a trip to New York, obviously. In terms of the BBC, my role is the head of audiences at the BBC. There are 3 key disciplines within that: audience research and analytics, which is the bit that we're focusing on today; audience planning, which is about taking audience insight and working with program makers about making new TV programs, new radio programs, and developing new products for the internet based on that insight; and audience services, who deal with over 1 million contacts we get from the audience every year, whether it's about wanting tickets for shows, making complaints, or saying whether they really enjoyed something. In terms of the BBC, I'm sure many of you have some experience of us. We were founded in 1922. These days we reach 97% of everyone in the UK consumes something from the BBC every week across TV, radio, online, mobile, interactive TV, etc. And you can get iPlayer technology, which allows you to watch BBC programmes on hundreds of different devices. So we are truly broadcasting in a cross-media, multi-platform way, and that obviously creates some fantastic opportunities and challenges. In terms of how many of you will know us around the world, BBC TV channels are now in 100 countries. World Service Radio reaches about 150 million people every week. And we're probably best known for our news, and around 225 million people around the world consume BBC News every week. I think many of the challenges come from the fact that the BBC is independent. Certainly in the UK, we're funded by a license fee of around $200 a year, and in return for that, we get to be totally independent and produce programs that aren't driven by the market or by advertising, but we have public purposes that we have to adhere to. But this does mean that we have a unique focus on the audience and not necessarily on commercial things. In terms of challenges, the same ones faced by many of us in terms of market and technology changes that are well evidenced by everybody in the world is changing. Secondly, in terms of the audience, just doing much more media. We had a recent study, 45% of all the time that people spend awake in the UK is now spent with media, which is an awful lot of time and a lot of simultaneous usage within that, so there's a lot more to measure than there ever has been. And then the whole area of measurement. So firstly, my challenge is about helping to understand how the different platforms fit together, how we can add value to audiences by making strategic choices in terms of investment in different sorts of platforms, and particularly focusing on individual pieces of content and an individual program and how that's consumed on television, online, and in different kind of ways like that. So building stories about how audiences are changing the way they consume television and radio programs. Secondly, the big challenge is around sort of giving a complete audiences picture. There's lots of missing data. We have different sorts of data sources, marrying up kind of insights, data and analytic data to tell sort of audience-centered stories that people can do something with rather than having a whole wall of information at them. And thirdly, the one thing we don't seem to have mentioned at all is money. And yeah, these things cost more and more money, the more things we want to measure. And at a time of fixed budgets that we have, that is a big challenge to get more for less or more for the same.
Very interesting. Thank you. Mainak. You have a little different position compared to these gentlemen, right?
No, I think our challenges are similar. First, thanks for invite to the global panel. I could speak with my Indian accent. What I do in Nielsen is I run a group called Center of Innovation, and this is a group of 100 plus PhDs quant, and our mandate is to reinvent the core. So a lot of the challenges that you heard, we face the same challenges globally, not in the United States. And so what I would like to kind of talk about is a couple of big initiatives, both on the watch side and the buy side. The watch is media, our media business, which is television, online, and mobile, and buy is our retail measurement. So that's how we look at our businesses. A couple of projects that actually illustrate how we're trying to address the challenge a little bit. The first one is the cross-media platform, which I think a lot of the audience heard today in a couple of presentations. And one of the challenges that we are trying to address is bringing different platforms together and ensuring the quality and the methods that we have used historically and been tried and tested, yet incorporate new data sources, new ways to report, and make sense out of it. And you heard a couple of things today, so we are making progress there. The other one is a set-top box. I know, Nielsen has been in set-top box R&D for a while, and I know there's a paper tomorrow that Pete Doe is going to give, and you'll hear more about this. But one project I would really want to bring to your attention is we have a joint venture in China with CCTV, which is called CC Data. And in that joint venture, we are testing using set-top box to report currency into 2 provinces. And I think a lot of us are very excited about that. It's a terrific work. And they have, the good news there is the digital penetration in China is 90+%, so it's an easy way to test that. And I believe that we're going to learn a lot from those tests, and hopefully we'll be able to use some of those learnings in the United States and in Europe. The second project, which we call, is basically reinventing our RMS, and I don't know how folks in this room, how much you know about RMS. RMS is a retail measurement service, which is a AC Nielsen business, if you can relate back to history. And that is in 100+ countries. There we report retail consumption across CPG sector. And in most countries, around 80+, we still, ride the bikes in rural areas, collect data from paper and pencil. And one of the major transformation R&D project going on with the team is moving from paper to mobile. So we are using mobile devices, smartphones, to collect data from the retail stores as well as consumers, and using image recognition technologies, take pictures and classify types of retail stores, for in Tanzania or Nairobi versus Indonesia. Like a tabletop is a retail store, and we need to classify that. The second is on the sampling, and I think a bunch of us are extremely excited on the sampling, where we are using technologies now, because some of the parts in Africa, we don't have good visibility of demographics, where people live, roadworks, geography, but people are consuming. I don't know if you know, 4 billion people out of 7 billion live in Africa, India, and China. I mean, I know we're sitting here in New York, but if you think about it, 4 billion people, and for CPG, our major clients, those are the consumers. I mean, those are the consumers coming up, and with this improving standards of living. So we need to figure out, use technology and implement different types of measurement. So we're using satellite imaging. So satellite imaging in combination with image recognition, we have built called grids, which is kind of a combination of overlap of people, structures, roadwork, and information that you get on maps, and create grids, kind of proprietary grids that can use for sample units and sampling frame, which, if successful, can be applied across different countries. And the third one, in Africa and in China, there's a couple of projects on crowdsourcing, because we can't go to the every places. Everywhere, and so there are a couple of tests we are doing, is having consumers report back through their mobile devices. And the mobile penetration in these countries, in Africa, India, and China, is phenomenal. I mean, India itself, in a given month, have 20 million new subscribers coming into the market. Like you're adding like Australia, every month on mobile subscriptions. So these are, I think, for the global panel and for audience, the key message is the numbers are huge. I mean, there are 250 cities in China. In 10 years, there are going to be 250 cities in China with 25 million people or more. And if you look at the statistics, those are, you got to sit back and be prepared. Challenge. I mean, I know methodology challenges are important. Duplication models, I think they're very, very important challenges, and we are dealing with them. But if you look at global scale, especially where the consumers are, I think the key is how you use technology and different ways of methods to capture the consumption and the media consumption and the retail.
Well, thank you very much for that perspective. Luiz.
Thank you for the invitation. I think that a lot of it, hearing everybody speak, there's a lot of globalization of the same problems and trends going on. Even though the recent recession has pushed away the topic of globalization a little bit back, but a lot of what we see is still the same trend of globalization. And so I invite everyone to take a little plane to South America now, and you're going to feel right at home, because the first thing you see in every rooftop is a DIRECTV antenna. So it's very much like you were in the U.S. DIRECTV is one of the largest, it is the largest TV operator today in the world, and it's growing faster actually in Latin America than in the U.S. You see that it's growing really fast, and some of the numbers that I had as official numbers to share are from 2010. And interestingly enough, just this past week, we celebrated 10 million subscribers in Latin America. So you can more or less grasp the speed at which those things are moving. But the numbers are growing really fast. And what we have tried to do back in 1999, before anyone was really talking about return path data and other ways of measuring television, we started the first system in Latin America, and published a little SOMAR paper that didn't get much attention at the time, but it was really the beginning of an experiment that is 10 years old now. And coming back to DIRECTV in 2008, after having started that project in '99, I basically tried to take over to the next step in its evolution, where we had one engineer working quarter time to maintain it for 10 years. So it really proves that it can be done, and it can be done on the cheap side if you really have to. But we have been investing a lot more on the system since 2008. We have developed new quality assurance processes, increased the staffing, changed some of the processes. And today, we have a system that is really the first RPD system still in Latin America. It's a commercial system now. It's been sold to a couple of different companies. And we're looking forward to expanding it. Just to give you an idea of the process, we have the boxes already in their houses. The receivers collect channels changes that is transmitted back to us via regular telephone lines, and we aggregate all this information. And we're working with TechEdge, an European company, to really create the interface for everyone to manipulate this data in a very efficient manner. Okay, we looked at the numbers compared to a well-established local measurement service, and in fact, the numbers are very similar to what the market is used to, at least in the top ranking of channels. As you go down, there is a discrepancy. First, because of course we have measurement of all the channels. That is not the case in the market today. And second, because we changed some of that. And
if I may interrupt, that was the main reason why you did this, right? In other words,
that's exactly it.
You were forced to create a new system because the system in the market did not measure your product. Is that correct?
That's a good cue. Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we didn't plan this ahead of time, right? So, but yes, the idea is to really have a system that could serve our internal needs, which is to really know what are the most important channels that we want to have on our lineup. And more recently, as we started to do advertising on our system, what's the value of that advertising?
Well, thanks. So in just hearing these different perspectives, the one thing that I think everybody sort of touched on is how technology is influencing not only how the media are being used, but also how they're being measured. So for, I think, very obvious reasons, you went with a set-top box. Mainak, you mentioned the smartphone or cell phone as the technology. And I'm just curious how you guys feel about the future of measurement from that perspective. Is the smartphone going to be a really, really decisive measure for media measurement just in developing countries, or is it also going to become important in Europe?
I think that the smartphone has really a lot of advantages. You have really, in the developed countries, 100% coverage, and you have also something like a implemented communication infrastructure and so on. However, I think there are some differences where you can use it. For example, I would guess, I'm not so familiar with the problem, but in developed countries, smartphones are more a lifestyle product. And if you want to change, let's say, yes, you have Android a smartphone, change it against the Symbian smartphone, and then you can be measured, could be a problem. But nevertheless, I think for the future, we have to think that we have with television not single devices, but we have an ecosystem for television, and therefore we need more than one solution to measure things. I think a smartphone is very good because you can cover everything, but on the price that you have something like a common denominator for it. And I think if you, for example, compare interactive TV with public viewing, then the common denominator a smartphone can give you is not sufficient for all questions. But nevertheless, I think a smartphone is very useful to make just a bracket around the ecosystem of TV. But in the future, I think we need a lot of different measurement techniques according to the targets and according to the different business models that are used in this ecosystem.
Can I just add, I think that's a very interesting thing. When you talk about a smartphone isn't enough, because I would agree completely. I kind of think anything that's smartphone plus or technology plus, because it gets you so far, and clearly anything that alleviates the enormous respondent fatigue that we're seeing when we're asking them to, tell us about 24 different platforms they've used in the last 48 hours is going to be a good thing if it can record all that information. But there are a lot of places where you're not going to be with your smartphone, whether it's when you're in the shower and you've got the radio on or all sorts of things. And certainly most of the success we've had seems to be from taking sort of analytical, machine data and adding it to audience recall and or any kind of respondent data and making sense of those two things together. And personally, yeah, I think we will have to. Our value that we're adding as researchers in the media world will come from interpreting a wide variety of different kinds of media sources and making sense of that so that people can make intelligent decisions on the back of it. So yes, I think it's very helpful, but it's not the be-all and end-all. And we should, it's not just about measurement for measurement's sake, it's about measurement in order to achieve something at the end of it.
So another thing, you were just saying is, and it came through in the different things that you're talking about, how for different solutions, like for you, the set-top box was ideal. You mentioned like in Africa and other places, the phone is just the ideal measurement. And you got your existing measurement, which you were telling us in Germany is just great. So using all of these different measures, all these different devices to conduct measurement for all these various business models and so on, I think a real big problem arises, which is to get comparable data. And James and I were talking about that when he reminded me that the BBC is not a UK company, but a worldwide company. And that one of your big challenges is, and I'm sure you all face that, to integrate data from different countries. And I'm sure you don't want to have data from Peru and Colombia not being comparable. So could you maybe talk a little bit about that challenge, about making data comparable? Is it correct? Is that one of the big challenges that we are facing?
Yeah, it is. I mean, business is global, but the consumption is local. Mm-hmm. And it's a more challenge, I think, in the media, because media is local. Media is bought and a lot of times created locally. And so it is sometimes, from a business model perspective, it's a challenge. Less so on the CPG categories. I mean, people use soaps. They're branded differently in Unilever in India versus China or, Europe. Sometimes same brand travels well. I think more on the consumer side, we find it's easier to harmonize methods, classification, categorization, as well as reporting of the information. And our key clients on consumer businesses actually want global view, and we do that. Mm-hmm. I think it's a more interesting challenge when it comes to media. And partly because the localization of media and advertising, and there are, I think, examples of companies that transcend and does things broadly on a global basis. But it is a challenge.
I think it is not necessary to achieve the comparability with the measurement. You can make in later stages of your television audience measurement system. And this is, in my opinion, the key. Perhaps you can use a smartphone, you can use fixed meter systems, and. You need some preconditions in order that you can achieve it, you can have comparability at the end. For example, you must know your universe, or you must know some other things, and then you can make a model where you put together all the measured data, and then you have comparability. So I think it is not necessary that we have one system for measurements that fits all. I think we can also have the same result if we have different measurement systems and put it together with editing and so on. But we need, for example, the knowledge about universes, about demos, and so on.
And potentially similar metrics as well. I think
similar metrics, but I think it is very easy. The only thing that we are measuring essentially is time use. If we have time use everywhere, we would be really happy.
Beautiful, because just my next thought was, we heard on several panels today that time use alone is not sufficient in today's market anymore. And that was just something that I thought would
it's
be
not
another
sufficient, but it is
topic
necessary.
that we want to
But it is necessary, not sufficient, but necessary.
Okay.
It depends what you're trying to do, doesn't it? I mean, if it's about reaching people, it's one thing. If it's about building relationships or building brands, then it's something else. And I would argue there's a whole load of things around the quality of the experience you're giving people, the quality of the engagement that you're having with the media time that people are spending to you is as important as reaching them in the first place. And it's the same as we had at lunchtime in the brilliant Pew session. You know, kind of attention is fundamental, and actually, you know, just being there is one thing, but actually engaging somebody properly is something else.
Is that something that you're doing in your job, trying to provide management with information that goes beyond?
Oh, totally, but I'm aware that we are unique in that we have the ability to do that because we have the license fee in our back pockets. I know what our income is for the next 6 years. We don't have to go out and fight for it. What I have to do is drive value for money for that. So I have to make sure that our audience think they are getting the value for money for that $200 they've already spent. So, which is a slightly different angle, but I also think that's incredibly powerful for, you know, in a whole digital world of endless choice, you know, you are about building relationships with your audience, and you're not going to do that just by plonking stuff in front of them. You're going to have to understand what it is that makes them want to come to you.
And what measurement tools do you use to assess that?
Oh, a whole host of things. We have a massive panel of 25,000 people, and each day we ask them to go and say every TV and radio program they consumed the day before. They score it out of 10. They offer a whole load of verbatim feedback on what they liked and disliked about the program. So editorially, we can change it a few days later. We understand whether they, if it's a factual program, learned something new, to what extent they thought it was high quality, what they thought of the presenters, all of those kind of issues. But I'm aware we're very fortunate to have that kind of information. And it's not, you know, clearly going to work in an awful lot of other places where, so.
To add to that, I think the issue is not as much of, you know, what are the metrics, but how, you know, do you define those metrics and how you fine-tune it. You know, in the effort to put things together from different sources, that's one of the challenges, is to really understand, you know, that, you know, a rating is a rating everywhere or not. You know, theoretically, a lot of this should be common sense. You look at a book, the definition, and you apply a formula, and you get it. But there's a lot of statistical playing in, you know, to get to the final number, to, you know, take into consideration weights and other data that sometimes is proprietary or confidential data. So, you know, to bring the data, you know, on a global level, you end up, you know, acquiring a lot of proprietary data here and there, and that's become a, you know, the difficult game. Is, you know, you're taking something that you don't know exactly how it was produced and trying to put together with something else that you don't know exactly how it was produced.
Let me get back to the measures of exposure. One of the themes that also was mentioned several times in the panels, we've talked about it, and your session just now was about that, and you mentioned that the measurement of television plus online, you know, cross-media exposure, you hope to have it solved in a couple of years. What does everybody think? Do you think it has been solved? Are you guys solving it already?
Well, I mean, we are very excited about what we presented today, and but it's just a start. We see it as a platform, and I think if you look under the hood and see through the design and methods, it just allows, you know, it just allows to take the quality and the panel-based measurement that we all are very aware of and very familiar and very comfortable, actually, and expand the possibility to incorporate other data sources. Now, to your point, there's going to be analytics. I think there's a difference between measurement and analytics. I don't want to get confused about that. In analytics, you know, you have proprietary ways of responding to a business question, and you could bring in proprietary data set. I think the lens that we presented is a measurement system that allows you to incorporate different data sources, registrations, social network. I mean, there is a possibility to use social data. You know, when we talk about complementing surveys with social, because people are, you know, devices are not devices. It's not a technology problem. You know, people talk about technology problem. I got to say, stop. It's not a technology problem. It's how people use it. By using it itself, you're creating new data streams. By talking on networks, you're creating data streams that you otherwise wouldn't have created. So you don't have to go and respond to a survey. So I think for this crowd, that horizon is important to open that possibility to start using different data sources, which we would not get in any traditional methodology if we apply it. So coming back to the cross-platform, we believe that this is a good start, and we'll build upon it. But I think the industry needs to participate. I mean, we can't, we can't just go with this. And I think industry needs to participate, clients needs to participate, and some of you are here. And I think if there's a participation, and if there is a really belief, which I think there is, that the brand measurement and that dollars are important to understand these cross, I think it will be successful. But I do want to say there are solutions. It's just a participation and cooperation in industry actually that drives the success.
And a desire, yeah, as I say, a desire for advertisers and people buying space to want to see the cross-platform picture rather than those who own particular platforms, the measurement of those platforms, to want to keep that the same and not, I mean, you have currencies, they work, and obviously if you then merge two of the currencies, one of those providers is going to lose out. So there's not necessarily the incentive unless you get a whole load of advertisers who say, actually, the audience I'm talking to operate in a completely cross-platform world. I want to be able to, plan my media or understand them in that cross-media world the same way.
Any comment? One of the issues that I'm concerned about is that now or in the near future, somebody's going to come up with a device that will be important for media usage, but somehow has the opinion that they own those data and that nobody else should get access to them. Is that an issue that worries you, or do you think sooner or later people like that will sort of say, okay, well, it's important, it's for research, we need the currency?
You mean
or do you see the danger of somebody of data just not becoming available and being considered proprietary? So people watch TV on the tablet, and the tablet owner says, they're my customers. You can't have those data. Is that something that's of concern, or do you think that's just not a real possibility?
I think it's already the case in Germany, not that they do not deliver the data, but they do not allow to measure the data, or do not allow them to measure the data with the measurement systems that we have. And this is really a problem in some cable networks, and this is also sometimes a problem with pay TV. And therefore, we need to have something like a fallback position for measurement. And I come back to the smartphone. A smartphone could be a fallback position always for measurement, because you can measure without asking any third party.
Right.
This is really the big advantage. And if you have the possibility, I do not a third party, sometimes the collaboration with a third party is much easier.
Does anybody else have that same experience?
I would just say it's very interesting. The chief executive of Channel 4, which is another broadcaster in the UK, last week described data as the new oil, which I thought was quite an interesting way, the potential wealth that's in controlling that data. And even listening to the Facebook guys this morning, and the questions that were coming to them about what kind of stories do you get, they have a wealth of information which is incredibly valuable to an awful lot of other people. So yes, I think it's clear data is incredibly useful, and yeah, we should work very hard at building partnerships and symbiotic relationships where everybody benefits.
I think it's a concern is that new devices come in and who owns the data, and that's the reason we build panels. That's research companies, 101, and the people research companies in this space will say that's the reason you have a panel that you select, handpick, you design, you want to address the biases, and there are methods available. We have learned them, how to select respondents, how to address biases, weight, and all the stuff that we do. And so before it was a paper pencil, then TV panels, radio panels, online panels, tablet panels. You have panels. So I do believe that we have to continue to look at the possibility of building independent panels regardless of what devices come into the marketplace.
It's not as much as the data itself as the relationship that you have already with the panelists, right? That is deriving the data, creating the value. That's what I think.
Thanks. I'm looking at the clock. I do want to give some time for Q&A, but if we could, just very quickly going around the stage here, in a sound bite, if we were sitting here in 3 or 4 years, any thought of what would you say it's going to be same issues, it's going to be different issues? Any thoughts on that? In your long-range perspective, what the big issue is going to be in a couple of years?
Well, I'd say, yeah, there'll be new platforms, there'll be new challenges, but it'll be the same kind of questions. And I still think, to me, it's all about, it's not just how big your numbers are, it's about what you do with the information that still remains powerful. And as long as we focus on how we're going to use the information, then the measurement questions that come at the back of that will be the sensible ones. And not to be obsessed about trying to measure everything at all the time and forgetting that the whole point why we're measuring it is in order to do something with that information afterwards.
I like that, because I think we're already seeing that issue sort of evolving. Any other thoughts? You're working on it, I can tell.
Yeah. I think in 2 or 3 years we can say that we have solved the current problems, but we will have new problems, and because the future is uncertain, we don't know today's problems of the future. Or not all problems of the future.
I will choose to interpret that as a very, very optimistic and positive view of the future, because it guarantees jobs for researchers. Yeah. And with that, may I ask our audience if there are any questions or brief comments? I think we have people with microphones. It's very difficult for me to see anything, but somebody's raising the hand. Well, if there are no questions, I want to thank you all for your attention. I enjoyed the panel very much. I think there's a really interesting takeaway, which is that even if you're defining your business as a US-centric business, I think there's so much information, so much innovation, and so many similar problems that are being faced and dealt with, and often very successfully around the world, that I think it's very, very important for us to adopt a more global perspective. The ARF is very much committed to that. We're going to start a global forum where we have, on a more regular basis, this kind of exchange, learning from each other, and hopefully helping each other to meet the challenges. So again, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.